All right.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for a conversation. And my first question for you is tell me about your music. Tell me about um who are you as a composer? Like what does your work represent? What like tell me everything.
Okay, well, let me tell you first how I started composing. So I started really young. I started improvising as long as I remember myself,
Oh
like
wow.
as for as long as I remember, whenever I saw, even before I took piano lessons, whenever I saw pianos, I just had to go and just kind of like try some things out and improvise things. And my first compositions, when I did actually start learning piano when I was 8, were just things that I did on the piano and then just memorized them and then kept adding to them.
Oh
And
wow.
these were my first compositions. So I've always been a composer and pianist and performer, and I've always been into kind of like creating from the instrument, from the
Mhm.
physicality of playing into the world, into the sound world.
Mhm.
So and I've remained an improviser and a composer and a pianist. So all the things that I started to do really young, I just kept doing them. And my goal was always just to continue doing them and do them better. And I kind of take pride in the fact that I write in lots of different styles and ways, and I don't have one thing that I like to do. I like to be diverse in how I approach composition and the musical languages that I use. And for a long time, for a composer, it's usually stigmatized. Like you're supposed to have your own voice, right? Whatever that
Mhm.
means.
Yeah.
Supposed to be original. And on the other hand, you also have to learn from the masters. And so this kind of culture of individualism that we live in, it's tough, right? It's tough to make your mark. It's
Mhm.
tough to find your individual voice. And especially if you're a musical omnivore like I am, when you love so many things and you don't want to exclude sounds and expressions from your own work, then I think it takes a longer time for a composer like me to establish themselves because of that.
Mhm.
Because I don't have a shtick, I don't have the thing I do. And I take pride in that because I want to continue. The whole point of being an artist is because we want to do what we want to do, right? It's not just
Yes.
about like whatever, external ideas of success are. It's about being able to continue to be honest and authentic and also just to do whatever you want, right? Like
Mhm.
that's why you get into it in the first place, right? You're not going to make a ton of money. So and you know that the people who will find out about you and hear your music, it's a small group of people. So if somebody's going to love your music, you want them to love it for what you are and who you are and what you want to do, and not for some, idea of how a composer should write. So so that's why, as a composer, I'm not afraid of, changing and evolving and trying new things and going back to old things. And uh and that's, that's kind of what I believe in. And what happened with me was that I did feel like, well, then what is my point of view, right? If I write in lots of different languages, what is an all-encompassing kind of idea behind all of the things that I do? And then I discovered that I was always inspired by the metaphor of motion. And that's how I started to get into, into the whole, cognitive linguistics. It's a big word to just mean that I thrive on metaphor, that I use metaphor, and the main metaphors that I use are kinetic metaphors in my music. So I'm thinking always about like, what's the if I write a chord like this, what's the energy potential of that chord, right? What's the difference in energy potential in a chord that is like played forte, tutti, and then immediately stopped and nothing is left to resonate, or something that is a chord that is forte, tutti, and then, let the strings finish their bow,
Mhm.
let the piano sound dissipate, let the percussion sound dissipate, and then diminuendo. That's a totally different energy profile in
Mhm.
both of these chords. It can be the same starting chord, but what it suggests for what's to come is totally different.
Mm.
And so it was from this kind of research that I got into cognitive linguistics, because cognitive linguistics tell us that even in our language, our daily language, we are always using metaphors from our own body, from our physicality, to understand abstract concepts. My
Mm.
favorite example is the word discover, because of the idea that when we see something, we understand it, right?
Mhm. Yes.
So that's why, when you explain something and someone says, "Oh, I see," they mean not just that they literally see, they mean, "Oh, I understand." And
Mhm.
when you take the word discover, it is removing the cover off of something so that you can see that thing. It is revealed to you, and then you understand it. So our language is full of these kinds of metaphors, and that's what inspires me.
Oh, wow. I mean, that was just oh my God. That was such an inspiring story. And first of all, I just have so many like questions now and so many like points that I want to explore. Um, First of all, I want to ask, um, you mentioned improvisation. Um, that particularly resonates in me because I've been struggling with improvisation as a classical trained violinist for a very long time now because I joined jazz improv in school, the jazz improv band, and I haven't been able to think of a single way to improvise on the violin, and it just interests me. Like, were you a classical trained pianist and then you learned to improvise, or did you improvise first and then you learned like the classical method of playing it?
I started improvising before I even knew how to play, and I just never stopped. So even as I was playing and I was learning pieces, I was reveling in the increased technical ability that gave me also the ability to improvise more complicated things.
Mhm.
And I have to say, improvising in a specific medium like jazz, that actually takes a lot of training, and it takes training that it's very hard to learn by yourself. I mean, it's possible, and you have to use your ear a lot and you have to emulate a lot, but that's extensive training that you can train yourself. And
Oh,
so
I see.
I think that that's the other thing, is that we think that improvisation should somehow come naturally to us.
Mm-hmm.
We should somehow just be able to do it. But
Yeah.
improvisation takes as much training, if not sometimes more, than learning to play, a written piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be hard on yourself if it's difficult. It takes the training, and if you don't have a teacher who's actually teaching you that style, then you need someone to even like show you how to teach yourself, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
need to start somewhere, and you need to have some guidance, even if very, general guidance about like what to listen to, what kind of jazz to listen to, and what kind of solos to maybe like try to play by ear or transcribe. Those are ways in which people traditionally study jazz improvisation.
Right. Wow, I actually never heard that before. No one's ever told me like you actually have to learn to improvise as well. So it's
Yeah,
quite
yeah, yeah, yeah.
interesting. And
Yeah.
yeah, and so now I might go and actually try to learn improvisation. Oh, and one other thing that was so interesting to me was, you mentioned it kind of sounded like physics as you were talking about it, like kinematics, like using kinetic like words, as
Mhm.
I understood, to kind of represent like the way you composed, like your composition process. And um I find that quite interesting because I never made that connection with physics and music. Because
Mhm.
I always heard in lessons like, oh, like bring out the tension in that chord, or bring out the way you release your bow arm. Like, those are and that's the exact kind of language that you were referring to, but you never think of it like to have the connection with the music itself. And my question is, you know, I want to like I want to hear like how does the composition process occur when you have like when you're working with both of those mediums? Like I feel like I know what you mean, but I want to hear about like a specific like example where that's happened.
That's interesting. Well, first of all, I want to comment on what you just said, which is very interesting because, you know, the listener is the listener can feel when your instrument is strained, you know.
Yes.
So there's some paradox there because music that has more tension usually also has some kind of physical strain related
Hmm.
to it, right? Like for example, um a very high oboe note that
Yeah.
is, you know, that takes a lot of breath, for example, and the instrument sounds strained, that contains a lot of musical tension within it. But the paradox is that to be a good player, you have to learn how to do things without straining your own body. So in some ways, there's a paradox there, but the instrument could still be somewhat, you know, brought to its more kind of extreme ability, right? But the
Hmm.
player needs to have the fortitude and the relaxation and the ability to breathe easily through anything. So,
Yes.
and I mean, we have lots of paradoxes like that. But in terms of composing, I think just like any skill that you learn, especially well, I think that this is true for many skill-based arts, that the first time you learn something, you have to be extremely mindful of it constantly. And then your body basically absorbs that
Yes.
thing,
Yes.
which is almost, some people call that unlearning, an unlearning process. Yeah, the
Wow.
learning and the unlearning. The unlearning being that it becomes part of you, part of your system, and it becomes intuition. I put intuition in quotes because I believe that a lot of intuition is internalized learning.
Mm.
So when I was first starting to think a lot about the kinetic possibilities, kinetic potential, energy potential, realization of energy, I had to think about it all the time. And I had to see how the idea of energy potential will influence my choice of dynamics, of timbre, of register, of how the instruments work together, of form, all those things where that was my first real glee about finding out about this kinetic idea, that it did influence all the aspects of composition that to me felt a little bit disparate before.
Hmm.
Composers, you know, just like educators, you kind of have to divide things to small components and
Hmm.
then put them together. So composers often they plan pitch materials separately from how they plan form, from how they plan timbral ideas, from how they plan rhythm. A lot of the times you plan those things kind of separately and then put them all together. But when you think about an energy trajectory of a piece, you know, when you think about a piece kind of growing in energy and then churning, and then, you know, when you think about a big climax as an ability to kind of like dissipate that a lot of the energy that was accrued, or as the heightened form of that energy after you've built it up, um, you start to see how you can think of every element of the music as related.
Oh, I
All
see.
relates to tension and release and the big,
Hmm.
so the small details and the big picture all relate to the ideas of tension and release. And
Mm.
so when I was first really thinking about it, which was around 2017, 2018, 2019, I really had to think about it constantly. And now at this point, I feel more kind of at ease with this concept, and I can sort of trust myself that I have internalized a lot of these things and they
Hmm.
come out more naturally. So I don't have to think of many elements of the piece separately because I already kind of know that here's what I'm looking for in terms of shaping direction. And
Mm.
and so it's become more natural to me that, oh, I know I need this register of the horn because I need to to bring it to this kind of tension level.
Oh, wow. That's a great way to put like the intuition that you just said, like into words, like in relation to your compositional process as well. I mean, I when I listened to Datsuzoku for the first time, I didn't um like obviously like I don't think I could have told like um you all of those like tension release, all of those kinetic things were like intentional. Like I don't know how to explain this, but it just like felt like the entire thing was just like flowing in one big like natural way. And so can you tell me about a little bit about the compositional process for that piece? I'm quite
Yeah.
interested.
So this is the piece that maybe was the hardest for me to write because
Oh.
I had probably the worst writer's block when I was writing this piece, and it took me a very long time to sort through that. Maybe it didn't take me a long time, but it felt like a really long time because because I've never had writer's block before.
Oh, wow.
Mm. And so quickly I left my composition room and I went on walks and hikes and I just tried to hear the piece in my mind's ear
Mhm.
and just walk around in nature and I would just talk into my phone and record myself describing what I can hear about the piece, what it should sound like. And and the nice thing about when you always think about like tension and release and directionality, you can also decide that you want to not have too much directionality. You can also decide that, oh, I want to compose something that is like an image where when you look at an image, the eye just wanders through the image very naturally, but there's no strong directionality.
Mhm.
It's all there for us to perceive, but the eye will still move to different parts of it and perceive different parts of it very naturally and easily. And so I think the first three movements of Tetsuzoku were just this, basically like images of gardens. So there is a bird garden, like an aviary, there is a stone garden, and there's another kind of garden. And so the first three movements, I was just creating these landscapes and maybe they were butterflies. So there was a little bit of movement and fluttering, but then it kind of went back to us just appreciating the garden. Because even when you sit in the garden and you're very still, the life is still around you in motion,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have too much of a direction. So you can
Mhm.
let your mind wander a little bit, and then you hear a sound from a bird, and then you see an insect flutter. And so that's how I composed the first three movements, where I wasn't looking for any of that directionality. And then it was actually towards the fourth movement that I started to ask myself, well, where is the human protagonist within this garden? And I started to walk through the garden in my piece. And then the journey started. So that was interesting because I probably could have just attempted to write a piece where there were six or seven gardens and they were all this kind of image that we can sit with. But maybe something was starting to drive me and I felt the need to kind of walk.
Mhm.
And so there is a motion away and a return
Mhm.
in the last three movements of
Oh,
the piece.
wow. That's interesting. I mean, it's so interesting how you started the journey in the fourth movement rather than just from the beginning. And also there's something very human about it, right? Um like sometimes we're not always like moving in a direction. Sometimes our life is just like very stable and I feel like that piece really reflects that and it's very humanistic. Um and and I feel like you have a great way of observing things in life that we as humans don't usually observe and putting them into such So it's great description, and it makes you really like think about all the things that happens around you, but you don't really think about. Mm. It's great, yeah. Um, and another thing that piqued my interest in your website was that you said you tailored your pieces to the performer. And I found that quite interesting because so if someone premiered your piece and you wrote it and you tailored it for them, and then another person wanted to play it, would you tailor it for them again? Oh.
It's a good question. Well, I think I'll give you the sort of extreme example, which is writing for voice. So whenever you write for voice, it really is just the body of the performer you're writing for, and everybody is unique. But I found that something that was lacking in my early composition education was that, you open an orchestration book or whatever, and it tells you how to write for that instrument, but it feels very impersonal. And the voice especially, you understand, okay, this is the range of the soprano voice, and this is where the passaggio is going to be. And and then you find that, well, it's not really, you can't really know a lot about how to write for this instrument, the voice, by just reading about it. So you really have to think about a specific singer and how they sound. So, listen to one vocalist and see, well, what do they sound like in their chest register? What do they sound like? Where does their passaggio lie, and how do they move around it across it? And where do they sound more speech-like, and where do they sound very dramatic? And when you start to pay attention to those details and you write a piece that one singer can sing, you know that they actually won't be the only person who can sing it.
Mm,
Because it's like the personal becomes somewhat more universal because you paid attention not to just to general things about the voice, but you paid attention to those specific things that, that are featured in one person's voice. And
mm,
that makes you just a more nuanced and kind of holistic composer. And
mm,
so I find that, if I write something for one person, and it may work really well for them, it might not be perfect for another person, but it will be something that they'll be able to make it their own. So
mm,
I do have a lot of pieces that I write for a specific person that then get played by other people. And I think because I made things rather specific to the instrument and the way that people think about their own instrument and their relationship to their own instrument, it becomes transferable to other people and to how they think about their instrument.
mm. Wow. And has anyone ever reached out to you when they were like replaying one of your pieces and said, "Oh, this doesn't work for me. Like, can we do something about it?"
For sure, especially voice again. So with
Mm,
voice, it can be like, oh, your piece would be perfect for me only if it was a minor third lower. And then if it's possible, if it doesn't change much about other instruments, if I didn't have a, a low G, an open G in the violin that will, that I can't play a minor third below in the same piece, of course, I'll be happy to make that adjustment and
mhm.
transpose it.
That's wow, that's quite interesting. I mean, I feel like that's the best one of my favorite parts about new music is that you can sometimes talk with the composer and come up with ways to adjust it and for more specific for your instrument and also more personal for yourself. And um yeah, I think that's so cool. And it's like the dream of any performer because sometimes you have to play stuff that isn't that a composer wrote, but they're not so familiar with the instrument and it's very uncomfortable to play. So this is actually like, I mean, I think this should be the case for every single composer to, really closely examine the instrument and or the singer and all of their little details. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I can also tell you that, whenever we supposedly finish a piece, it's not truly finished until it was performed and until the performer grappled with it and found things that worked or didn't work for them. And something that's not a big secret, but many composers do, is that we love to receive your part after you played our piece and see your markings on your
Oh.
part. And we like to learn from that. So for example, if you're a violinist who is playing my piece and you completely rewrote my bowings
Mm-hmm.
and made it sound much better than I did when I was writing the bowings, I will absolutely look at those bowings and adjust my own piece according to that. Or
Mm,
ask you, what did you need to change? What didn't work for you that you already changed without having a big discussion about, because they were minor changes and they just made it more, organic for your body and your instrument. And I will take that feedback and I will put it back in the piece. And every time another player plays it, it will be tweaked even slightly more.
mm,
And all the pieces that I write, and many composers are like this, we will continue tweaking them when they have met their, the more and more performances. So the more performances a piece has, the more the piece becomes viable for a larger group of performers and for the world.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's such great advice for me and for so many like performers nowadays, to know. That's like the best advice you could get. And now I'm gonna after I play an like a composer's piece, I'm gonna send it back to them with my bowings and fingerings.
Yes.
Hopefully, yeah. Hopefully they'll appreciate it the way you would. I want to ask you, like, okay, so this is like completely unrelated from what we've been talking about so far. Um, and it's what you said in the beginning, that you're always open to experimenting with new ideas because you are this kind of omnivorous like composer and musician. And I'm wondering like what's in the future? Like what do you want to explore more? What are you interested in?
I really hope to be able to go back to my singer-songwriter stuff at some point in the future and write new songs and also release an album of that stuff, because I've always been told that my voice is not good enough, that I'm not a professional singer. I should let other people sing my music. But there's always, with being a singer-songwriter, it's not about perfection and about having the technical abilities of a trained singer. There's of a lot of room, a lot of space to be expressive and
Mm-hmm.
imperfect. And and that's something, I think that it takes a little more courage, especially when you've established more of a career in contemporary composition. It takes a little courage to say, I'm actually going to devote, a year or a couple of years of my life to doing this other totally different genre. And I think that's one of my dreams. And there's a skill set there that I don't have yet, because I've only just released my first album as a composer of chamber music, classical contemporary chamber music. And before I made this album, I didn't know how to make an album in that, in the genre that I'm very well kind of equipped to create in. But as a singer-songwriter, there's even more things that I don't know how to do yet. So I look forward to learning a lot when I do that.
Great. Wow. I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing your singer-songwriter debut. I'll be looking for it.
Thank you.
And now I kind of want to pivot from your work and talk, well, your work and talk about a little bit more about your experience learning contemporary classical music. Since this is also geared towards like a few students. Um, and I just want to ask, like, how was your experience starting out as a composer? Like, for for example, if anyone who wants to go into composing is watching this, like, how did you start, and what were some challenges you faced?
Yeah, it's very interesting that there are quite a lot of people who get into composition a lot later in life,
Mm-hmm.
and in their 20s or even late 20s, and people who may have had experiences in music but then started composing late in life. And I find that that's a very different experience than somebody like me who started composing very young.
Mm,
We have a totally different set of challenges from one another.
mm,
So I think I started composing on my own when I was very young, and then I had people encouraging me to do it. And interestingly, not my parents. My parents really encouraged me as a performer because I was practicing piano every day, and I needed to be serious on the piano. And in some ways, it was good for me that they didn't encourage me in composition because it was my thing that I wanted to do, and it came from my
mm,
own motivation. So I think if you have it in you that you feel the need to create, it's I think just do it. Just start small, start with what you know. And the fun thing about composition is that when you're the composer, you make up the rules, right? So if you're a performer and maybe you study some theory, and in music theory school, or classes, they told you, oh, you're not allowed to write parallel fifths, for example. Well, when you're a composer, you can do whatever you want. You can write those parallel
mm.
fifths. You can write a whole piece based on parallel fifths, and it might be a really cool piece. So I really encourage somebody who is curious and has that creativity to compose their own music. And the best advice I can give is that start by composing something that you can perform or that you can perform with your friends, and have fun with it and do
Mm,
something that's creative. I always love playing composed music, classical music, and I love playing chamber music, but I just have this thing in me that I always want to express myself more. I always want to
mm,
be creative. I always want to do things that I wasn't told to play.
mm,
And so if you have the same kind of feeling that you just want to express yourself and you want to be creative, just start to do it. And you know and you make up the rules, and make up rules that will create an interesting piece. Make up limitations for yourself, because otherwise it can be kind of paralyzing, because when you're the composer, when you know that everything's possible, then that can be paralyzing. Oh
mm,
no, everything is possible, so how do I choose the next note?
mm,
there's you know there is 12 notes to choose from, or more if you're writing microtonal music, and many octaves to choose from. How do you choose the next thing? And so as composers, we establish the limitations that we want to work within, and that helps our creativity become more free.
Wow. I mean, that's such a great answer. And I completely, when I was listening to you talk, I thought of this, and it's that, art and music it's like there's no definite answer. That's what differentiates it from like math and science, and it's really to express ourselves and to do whatever we want. And yet it feels like classical music is kind of a very rigid structure in terms of, you know, the society, like the hierarchical structure, and also the music in itself is um quite structured. And I think that there's that kind of clash, but then the kind of creativity that you're describing, the kind of like want for composing to create something, and to not care whether it's correct or not, that's kind of what um blurs this kind of clash between, or like takes away that clash between what defines music and what, right, classical music is perceived as. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that kind of breaking of those barriers, it makes you feel also more ownership of the music that you are playing that was written.
Mm,
Because then you understand that this is not, I mean, now it is set in stone, but somebody was creative. Somebody made this. And they made this probably with a player in mind, or for themselves to play.
mhm,
And when you start to also be creative yourself, then you don't feel that really rigid kind of barrier between you and the composition you're playing, because you feel kind of how those borders were kind of fallen,
mhm,
kind of they don't. It's not so much, I have to just do what this composer said, and then this composer is the master. No, you feel like you're all part of the same big community. Even if this composer lived 300 years ago, you still feel that living art.
Mhm. Absolutely. And oh my God, wait. My Zoom says less than a minute, but I just want to say I completely agree with everything that you just said. And I want to thank you for such an inspiring talk. Like I feel like I want to go out and explore so many different things now. So thank you so much for your time.
I am so glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you, and I hope you continue to explore new music and that your friends also continue to hone that curiosity.
I hope so too. Thank you so much for your time.